Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Magic the Gathering unofficial audiobooks podcast. I am Baron, Mage Master of Talaria, asking for your support of the Patreon for our wonderful narrator, Phil. He's already received another supporter on Anchor. Thank you, Christopher, but he could really use your support on Patreon, where just today he posted a thrilling tale of his battle with the so-called spiciest ramen in the world. The proceeds from the Patreon are leading up to a grand goal of bringing the best friend of his wife all the way from America to Japan, for the first time in 3 years. And the first month was a great start. And as always, your support encourages the continuation of this project, which I am ever so thankful for. And we have a guest today who's also very thankful we've made it this far, young Teferi. Are you kidding me? You are an infant. I can't do this. I can't do this anymore. Chapter 13. The line of Talarian runners darted across the grove, their long legs flashing like swords. Sunlight slanted through the forests to either side. The lead machine coursed along a deer path, mounted a gentle slope, and emerged onto the crest of a summit where it paused. The others loped up alongside it. Hydraulics whined as the machines turned, surveying the plains below. At the far end of the fields, Angelwood bristled with moving figures, Phyrexians. Fangs and claws and barbed tails flashed among the tree boles and undergrowth. Skin as pale as bone gleamed sickly, leathery folds of hide, knobby shoulders, jagged scales, barbed manes, and eyes like slivers of midnight. They were monsters of mutation. Now some of them scavenged bits of metal from fallen falcons, and runners and pumas were making their way into the beasts' bodies. Not merely war armor, not merely body weaponry, these hunks of metal were badges of violent valor. They were kill trophies, recovered from fallen machines. On the fields ahead, metal troops gathered to oppose these monsters. Runners in their hundreds flooded onto the belly of the land. Pumas bounded down from the treetop glades and stalked through the tall grasses that verged on the Angelwood. A large phalanx of scorpions filled out the center of the army. The runners on the summit creaked and moved aside, making room for a new arrival. A large runner, fitted out with saddle and control panel, vaulted into the cleared space. Its rider stood up in the saddle and lifted an olive hand to her brow, peering out across the battle. "Karn, get up here!" the rider called over her shoulder. A gleaming figure labored up the deer path behind her and stomped to a standstill. "I'm not built for speed, Joyra," the golem said simply. Ignoring the comment, Joyra said, "The main body's coming straight through Angelwood, and the Falcon Watchers reported. They must have mined their way into the cave complex on the southern edge of the forest. It's just as well. Angelwood is a mild time sloth. Well, most of our forces stop the advance. We'll be able to move through the forest eaves and reach the cave mouth where they're emerging. We'll cut off the advances and then hammer them from the rear." "How will 6 runners, a young woman, and a silver golem stop an army of Phyrexians?" Karn asked, his metal frame whining in doubt. Joyra flashed a smile over her shoulder and sent her runner bounding down the slope ahead. "You'll see!" The other runners followed. They were fleet-footed, striding like ostriches. Their 3-pronged feet scrambled across the shifting stones as they half slid, half ran from the hillside into the verges of the forest. They wove their way among great black boles and crashed through damp undergrowth. To one side, the dark dome of the Phyrexian Gorge hulked. To the other, Angelwood glowed, infested with hundreds of slow-moving, shambling monsters. Ahead lay a mossy mound of stone. It was a volcanic extrusion, a wound in the earth, riddled with caves. It was through those thousands of catacombs that the demonic troops had emerged into the forest. Joyra directed her mount up the ancient rill and into the slow time of Angelwood. She charged up the mounded pile of stone, knowing even then that fiend hordes moved through the caverns beneath her. The other 5 runners bounded up behind her. Karn toiled in silvery languor at the forest's edge. Joyra's runner leapt up a knob of stone and scrambled across it to the other side. Before them loomed a sheer drop into the mouth of the main cave. Joyra halted. The 5 other runners bounded into position beside her, their legs whining in complaint. From the mossy cave mouth emerged a steady stream of Phyrexians, ambling 4 abreast into the hot undergrowth. The monstrous column fed the army massing on the plains. The tide could be stemmed right here. Wishing Karn were faster, Jorah wrangled her mount up beside a leaning boulder and drove the machine against it. Servos realigned, and the main thrusters of the modified runner flexed. The great stone grated heavily in its cradle. It tilted. Sand sifted from beneath it and rained down over the cave mouth. With one more shove, the runner sent the stone over. Jorah frantically brought her mount back beneath her and regained its balance on the verge of the cliff. The boulder rolled out, tumbled for a moment in massive silence in midair, and smashed down atop a trio of hulking Phyrexians. The stone split like a peeled orange. Golden oil blood, shattered bone, and pulped muscle mixed with the stone shards and sand. The column of monsters behind the site drew reflexively back into the cave. They bunched up at the head of the army. It was now or never. Jorah rode her runner over the edge of the cliff, came to ground on the oily ruin of the boulder and the beasts. Beside it, 5 of the runners dropped. They landed on wheezing legs and pivoted. Crossbow bolts, 16 from each runner, pelted into the Phyrexians massed in the cave. The 96 shafts struck and stuck in meat and bone. The vanguard of the Phyrexian line crumpled, and those behind withdrew a few paces more. It was enough. Jorah led the charge into the cave with her runner. It clambered over rock shards and the bodies of Phyrexians. The 5 others followed. She drew the slim sword that rode at her waist and brought it slicing down through the carapaced head of a negator. It gurgled but flung out its massive arms to drag her down. Leaving the blade in the thing's head, Jorah vaulted from her saddle. Her mount charged down, out from under her, and swung its scythe blades to engage the fiend. To either side of it, the other runners latched onto their quarry. 10 blades swept out and caught 5 beasts. Jorah, meanwhile, ran toward the cave mouth. It would take only moments before the self-destruct mechanisms activated. The first, biggest blast came from her own mount. It macerated the beast that held it and sent Jorah's sword flinging up into the ceiling of the cave. Bits of gore splattered the walls. The blast threw Jorah free. She crashed among dewy leaves as other 5 bombs ignited. Fire and smoke, bone and stone, waves of belching sulfur. With a great roaring rumble, the top of the cave went to pieces. It collapsed, slowly and magnificently, across the army of fiends, mashing them. Rubble sealed the passageway, mortaring it with glistening oil. The shattered hillside slumped downward in a vast landslide, and like a figure out of a dream, the silver man solemnly rolled that slide down to the ground. He clambered from among the tumbled stones and charged to Jorah's side, drawing her up in concern. "Are you all right?" The woman smiled tightly, bloody scrapes across her face. "Well, we sealed off the advance." Karn raised his head and stared warily into the forest. Many of the lumbering monsters that had emerged ahead of the blast had turned at the sound of it. They converged in a fierce semicircle of the silver man and his friend. "Yes, we sealed off the advance. Now we can attack them from behind, like you said." Jorah staggered weakly to her feet and saw the approaching hordes. She sighed in resignation. "I don't imagine you could pick me up and outrun them." "I'm not built for speed," Karn answered sensibly. A solemn nod was Jorah's reply. "We didn't get rid of Crick, you know." Karn seemed to consider. "We fought. That is all anyone could expect." Jorah looked up sadly at the golem and saw, reflected in his silvery hide, the 100 fiends tightening their circle. Some had teeth as long as swords. Others clawed their way forward on limbs as gnarled, strong, and numerous as mangrove roots. Lupine heads and barbed hackles, coiled stingers and bone-studded jaws, naked haunches and cloven hooves, pulsing poison sacs and pulsing brain sacs. "It's been a pleasure being your friend, Jorah of the Gitu," Karn said with elaborate solemnity. She smiled brightly. "If I have to die, and all of us have to, I'm glad I died beside you." With an ululating cry, the monsters rushed in upon the pair. A forest of fangs and claws and stingers converged. Karn shielded Jorah with his silver bulk. There was only shrieking, and blood and limbs flung outward to thrash the trees. Amid talons and teeth came blue flares of magic. Some coalesced into dagger swarms that buzzed like bees through the melee. Others spattered eyes and woke in them cannibal rage. Still others melted tooth and bone into chalky pools, growls and gurgling, blood and burning, death and dismemberment. In moments the furious carnage spent itself. The forest grew still again. Karn turned, confused. Jorah emerged from the haven of his arms. There was someone else beside them suddenly, a blue-robed man with gray-brown hair. He brushed his hands together as though he had just closed a rather dusty door and then withdrew his fingers into sleeves designed for spell battle. "Ah, here you are," Baron said matter-of-factly. The main battle is going well. When I heard the explosion here, I thought it must have been the work of you two. Joyra breathlessly surveyed the killing grounds. The forest reeked like an abattoir. The fiends! You killed them. You cast a spell. A series of sorceries, Baron replied. Some of my best summonations and enchantments. They were well spent, though, and I can get them back. That's what libraries are for. I couldn't have gotten you two back. Gotten us back, Jorah repeated absently. Urza needs you in Shiv, Baron said. The Master had been gone for a few months, and in the escalating Phyrexian War, Jorah and Karn hadn't had much time to wonder about the success of the mission for Thran Metal. I summoned him to aid with the battle. One of the reasons it is going well. Anyway, he says he struck a deal with the Viashino. He needs you to be a liaison with them. He needs you and Teferi and a number of other students and scholars to help him run things with the lizard men. I will stay behind with most of the academy. We will carry on this war until you return. And me? Karn asked. Does he need me? Yes, Baron said, his expression darkening. Yes, Karn. He needs you perhaps most of all. No! The gray lever, not the red one! Shouted Joyra down the line of steaming pipework. Remembering herself, she repeated the instruction in Viashino. Her dialect of the language was, of course, Gitu and therefore somewhat difficult for the lizardmen to understand. Even so, after half a year of working daily with lizardmen, Joyra was the only human who could speak Viashino at all. Urza couldn't exactly be called human. Just now, the creature she spoke to cast quizzical looks up the foggy line of pipes. Gray, you know, the color of your blood. Red is the color of mine. Joyra was almost frustrated enough to bite her own hand to demonstrate what she meant. One of the younger lizards, a Diago Dirv, gestured emphatically at the appropriate lever. The scaly imbecile to his left grabbed the red lever anyway. Diego dealt a slap of his webbed hand, a bit of correction used by many members of the Viashino Society, reached over himself and drew the right lever. A blast of steam came from the pipe stack behind Joyra, venting into the black heights of the cavernous room. The stench of sulfur and superheated rock permeated the place. It boiled across the unseen vault, jiggling loose the condensation clinging there. Hot drops pelted across her sweating back. Joyra drew up a cloak of drake feathers, standard issue for workers in the lava pits. The feathers were proof against even the hottest temperatures, and yet they wicked sweat and heat away from the skin. Beneath the cloak she wore only a loose, light shift of linen and similarly loose pantaloons. Her feet were shod with drake feather slippers, and she had matching gloves in case she needed to handle any of the red-hot controls. The vitreous pipes began to glow as lava came pumping up them. The heat of the chamber redoubled. In a few minutes, it would be a veritable oven. Let's get up to that blast furnace, Joyra instructed. The scales of the lizard men prickled from faces, arms, and tails, struggling to bleed heat into the air. Wide-eyed and panting, the Viashino nodded their eagerness. It was one gesture they had picked up from their human colleagues. Good. Follow me. Climbing over a jumble of dark tubes, unused and cracked from centuries of neglect, Joyra led her contingent to the wooden ladder. Its iron rails would be too hot to touch, and even the wood was bearable only with drake feather gloves. Joyra ascended. Diago Dirv followed. His comrades came in his wake. Joyra reached the hatch above, turned the thick metal wheel that disengaged the locking mechanism, and flung back the hasp. Hot air roared up around her as she clambered from the shaft. Those in the chamber above, a bright, airy space filled with giant, fat-walled furnaces and great slag buckets, turned to watch the sooty and sweating creatures emerge from their infernal underworld. Among the workers in the furnace room was Teferi. The young man had traded impish games for keen forcefulness of will and a relentless search for knowledge. Tall, lean, and wiry, Teferi was handsome and clear-eyed. His dark skin was yet unmarked by the care wrinkles of age, but his brown eyes held an amazingly intense focus. Though chronologically he was 1/3 Joyra's age, they seemed physically as well as metaphysical twins now. Joyra, he said, approaching her. The mage and the artificer were equal partners in this endeavor, overseeing the full deployment of the mana rig. How many conduits do we have working now? 25 if this one holds, Joyra responded. That should be enough to fire all 5 furnaces. Teferi noted with approval. He flashed her an appreciative and dazzling smile. It's only 1/10 of the major pipeways, Joyra replied. I still can't get it out of my head that there should be a lot more to this facility than making metal. The power this place could draw from the volcano would be sufficient to run 50 furnaces, but there aren't 50 here. They must have used the power for something else. Teferi moved in close to her. A hint of his old capriciousness glinted in his eyes. He was still arrogant enough to use magic to enhance the twinkle in his eyes. I tell you, the answer lies in the taboo halls. I've been begging you for months to explore the place with me and jeopardize the alliance, Jorah hissed. As long as the Drake Jeradargars lives, the alliance will not be broken, Teferi said. Come on, say you'll come with me. Jorah sighed in resignation. Once the metalworks are fully operational, until then, we have no time for messing around. That could take years, Teferi pressed. Well, make years into months, and you won't have to wait so long. The approach to Jeradargaz's Eyrie was forbidding in the extreme. The lands in a 10-mile radius were goblin territory, and in it, the voracious creatures were as thick as maggots on a carcass. In a 2-mile radius, the dragon's nest was surrounded by a boiling sea of lava. The Eyrie itself perched atop a jagged pinnacle of stone that stood like a crooked finger in the center of a caldera. Other tumbled monoliths lay in the bubbling basin. They were spaced just far enough apart that no terrestrial creature in its right mind would try jumping stone to stone to reach the nest. Neither Urza nor Karn were known for being in their right minds. Neither were they exactly terrestrial. They stood silently on the rocky verge of the magma pit. They had been in Shiv for over a year and still felt they walked the surface of an alien world. The audible shuffling of goblin feet, furtive and feral, in the wastelands behind them only added to the impression. Urza stared for some time at the distant drake's nest, a huge incrustation of 3 bows woven together with black pitch and fired clay. He stooped, picked up a large stone, and hurled it with incredible force across the surface of the caldera. The stone skipped 12 times before melting away into nothing. We are, each of us, capable of leaping stone to stone to get there, Urza said idly. Yes, Karn replied. Urza nodded, his nostrils flaring. Any living creature would have been poisoned by the gases venting in twisted columns past. I could cast a sorcery allowing us to lava walk or to fly. Yes, Karn said. Urza stooped to lift another stone, but thought better of it and squatted for some time, watching ghosts of steam promenade across lava. I could conjure my own fire drakes and send them to slay this one. Yes, Karn said laconically. You are Urza Planeswalkers. You can do anything. You can wish us into the nest and wish Jeradargaz from existence. You can do anything you want. You are Urza Planeswalker. It was Urza's turn to be laconic. Yes. Karn turned toward the scintillating man. You can do anything. So why did you trade me away for an army of Thran metal artifacts? The Planeswalker's eyes hardened. You answer your own question. Why wouldn't I trade 1 silver golem for an army of Thran metal men? There's a great war coming. We must all make sacrifices. But you sacrificed me. He had hardly spoken the words when, with a sudden vertiginous whirl of movement, the cliff top melted away. The scarlet sea and sooty sky disappeared as well. Karn stood still. Urza was planeswalking them into the Eyrie. A human could survive that trip only by being carried in a protective embolism or turned to stone, or made a flat creature of immutable geometry. Karn merely rode as he was. Urza had sent him on more troubling journeys. They arrived. The sooty sky remained above. The rest of the world was replaced by a vast, woven bowl of wood and clay, the lair of the fire drake. One corner was filled with a midden of bones, bleached and bare in the brimstone breezes. Beside it lay the half-eaten hulk of a small whale, had apparently been plucked from the water like a herring caught by a kingfisher. The reek of the rotting sea creature was borne outward on clouds of flies. It mixed with the stench of sulfur and another smell, savage and salty and keen-edged like wood smoke. Jeradargaz, the great drake herself, lay in the opposite corner of the nest. She seemed at the moment only a huge pile of red skin, scales, feathers, and fur. Her great muzzle oozed twin steams of smoke. Soot tangled languidly among her spiky brows and rangy mantle. A pair of massive claws lay beside her face. Wings of skin folded over her flanks. The creature's scaly tail coiled on the rock-hard base of the nest. Urza stepped toward the creature and said, without preamble, I am Urza Planeswalker. I can kill you with a thought. I will kill you with a thought if you make any move to harm us. and I will kill you unless you cease your attacks upon the Viashino settlement. The drake slowly lifted her head. Giant lids drew back from split-pupiled eyes, filled with gold and black striations. The beast spoke. Her voice was vast and purring.
Not much to parley, are you?
Our message is understood? Urza said with finality.
Understood, yes.
The drake responded.
Obeyed, no.
You have no alternative, Urza said.
I do have an alternative.
Jaradargaz corrected.
Death is an alternative.
What creature would choose death over life?
I would,
Came the immediate response.
You have clearly not been a father.
Urza cast a long glance at the silver man at his side. I have been a father,
Oh, yes.
purred the drake in remembrance.
Urza Planeswalker. I'm well enough aware of human mythology. Yes, you had a son. Harbin was his name. You blinded him when you destroyed Argoth. Some say you even sank his boat to kill him.
I tried to keep him away from the war, Urza replied as in a reflex. What I did to save all Dominaria.
You sacrificed your son to save the world,
The drake said.
That is the difference between us, Planeswalker. I would sacrifice the world to save my son. I will not give up the fight to free him.
Ramadargaz chose to leave you. He chose to join the Viashino, Urza pointed out.
Your son chose to join the war.
Urza's features drew into an angry knot. I could kill you now.
Yes, you could, Planeswalker. History says you would. But why? Then, am I still alive?
Urza cast one last fierce glance at the creature. You have been warned. With a thought, he and the silver man departed the fiery eyrie. Baron ran. Franz slapped him. He thrashed through underbrush. The thing behind him was huge and sinuous. It slithered in his wake. A giant python, muscular, fleet, silent, and cold-blooded. Its horned head was as large as the Mage Master himself. If it unhinged its jaw, it could swallow him whole. 2 man-sized bulges distended its gut already. There have to be sorceries to defeat this thing. I know hundreds of them. It's just a matter of thinking. Something about swamp walking? The Mage Master ran. He had been in the heat of combat when the thing had broken through the line. The beast's sudden appearance had interrupted a complex casting. Mana burn had lashed Baron. He had fallen back. Jangled, he had racked his brain for defense, but found none, and ran. This thing wasn't Phyrexian. It was summoned. The python had been invoked by a Phyrexian capable of casting spells. That was new. Apparently, Crick had been decanting time-resistant mutants long enough to raise a wizard from their ranks. A wizard or 2, or perhaps a small army of them. The giant serpent behind him was not only a terrifying man-eater, it was also a harbinger of greater evils to come. Breath sawed Baron's throat. Vines clawed his arms. The creature's cold breath billowed out around him. It almost had him. He redoubled his speed. Think, think! Treacherous ground stole his feet. With a curse, Baron tumbled. He crashed through a break of undergrowth and smashed against a tree. The serpent coiled into view. It reared up on a broad, shimmering belly of scales. Its mouth glimmered with teeth. Its jaw yawned wide and dislocated. Baron clawed behind the tree trunk. He hissed instinctually and glared into the thing's eyes. What is that summation spell Teferi's working on? A creature that can cross time streams. Not the imps, but the other one, Teferi's duck. No, that's wrong. The monster coiled rapidly around the mage. It looped the tree and lunged. Teferi's Drake! A yellow-skinned dragon phased into being beside Baron. It spread its wings in tight confines of the jungle, and its head darted about angrily. Though the python was gigantic, in the shadow of the drake, it seemed only a worm beside a chicken. The drake's head jabbed downward. Its beak-like mouth snatched up the python. The serpent riled in the monster's mouth. One of the man-sized lumps in it convulsed too, Whether in defiance or digestion, Baron couldn't tell. Arching its neck backward, the yellow drake sucked down the python and swallowed it in one gulp. Baron slid back down beside the tree, panting in dread. If he had been killed by that python, there would have been no one left to summon Urza, no one to lead the students. There'd be more giant pythons, more minions of evil, more Phyrexian mages. How many wizards does Crick have? Into his musings came the acute realization that the summoned drake stared down at him. Its eyes were at once empty and accusing, like the eyes of Karn. Then, as suddenly as it had arrived, it phased out of being. That was the flaw in Teferi's spell. To date, the creatures he summoned could cross time rifts, but remained in existence for only minutes. Baron had known of this side effect, but he had been desperate. The drake had been created only to fight. Disposable. How like Karn. Karn sat on a stone escarpment on the mountain side of the manor rig. The ceramic arteries beneath the structure glowed with pulsing lava, pumped up from the caldera below. Within the plant, massive articulated arms would be cranking huge shafts. Steam shot in vast columns from the top of the rig. The whole thing rumbled and roared in a foul-tempered fury. The rig seemed a great beast, crouching in the red-black sunset, hissing into the sky, slurping from the lava pool. They had brought it to life. After a year and a half of labor, Joyra and Teferi and Urza had brought it to life. Joyra had proven herself yet again the critical connection between Urza and the folk under his command. Teferi had come into his own as an innovative leader and mage. Together, they had achieved an uneasy alliance between the human students and the Viashino workers. Urza, meanwhile, strong-armed the Drake, Jeradargaz, out of attacking the facility. Even his presence was enough to reduce the constant goblin border battles to only sporadic incidents. The mountaintop was ruled by an iron fist and a velvet glove. All had progressed according to plan. The first new castings of Thran metal were only moments from being poured. They had brought it to life. But Karn felt dead. Perhaps it was because Teferi had replaced him as Joyra's closest companion. Their work to vivify the facility had made the close contact necessary. Their species had made the close contact welcomed. Karn felt no jealousy about this growing relationship, and even was happy for Joyra to have a friend made of flesh and bone. But between her work and Teferi, Joyra no longer had the time for long strolls or afternoon conversations with the Silverman. He wished again for those bleak days together in the guard towers of Talaria, but that was not what dragged at Karn. No, the feeling of dread and death came from the sentence on his life. When all was said and done, he would belong to the lizard men. Urza had offered to move his intellectual affective cortex to a new shell of Thran metal, though the man could not promise Karn's mind would move with it. With a sudden roar, the facility erupted into motion. Though the forbidden sections of the rig remained dark, windows across the rest of it flared with light. The very walls of the great machine rumbled and glowed. The patient roll and plunge of the facility's crankshafts and pistons accelerated to a deep and trembling drone. Jets of steam above the facility coalesced into a great sooty cloud that blotted out the sun and sky both and wrapped the rig and the Silverman in a choking fog. He sat a while longer, shrouded in gloom. The forges would be firing, the metals forming, the molds filling. Within the structure, a new army of metal men was being born. Outside of it, an old metal man was being killed. All around him, small red eyes emerged from nearby crevices and caves. Unseen by the downhearted golem, goblins ventured up to the very verges of the rig, stood atop each other's shoulders to peer into windows, and set hundreds of tattered claws to whatever loose plate or door gap presented itself. In one place, they found their way inside. Hundreds of them. I do miss Urza, Joyra, Karn, and yes, I'll admit it, even Teferi. Their labors on the island before they left had given us solid defense against Phyrexian incursion. I can only hope their labors in Shiv will do the same for the world itself. Crick's machinations advanced exponentially. Just because our artifact machines can repulse his current generation of negators does not mean they will repulse the ones that emerge in a few months, let alone any more negator mages who might make it out. We tracked down and slew the one who had summoned the python, but there will be others. The students, colleagues, and I work hard to improve and adapt our designs, to suggest new machines, and to create new spells, but even our fastest fast-time laboratories run at half the speed of Krix. It will come down to a final conflict, both here on Talaria and out in Dominaria at large. To win our little war here, we'll need Urza and Joyra and all the others. To win the coming conflict, we'll need a new machine. One designed by Urza himself, one that can adapt to anything. One with firepower greater than that of the whole island. Urza started a design before he left. Perhaps he has finished it by now. Baron, Mage Master of Talaria.